turn for the better. Mind the side effects.
That's out. Committed to memory.
Preparing for dust-up.
Stand clear. House World Roll. The Temple of Wisdom. Committed to memory.
A bitter pill to swallow.
Animal test 6 degree away. This way, Trina. Make yourselves at home. The memory, the Temple of Wisdom.
We have a Nahida rerun incoming, and naturally the big question is, should you get her? With the imminent release of a new Dendro support in Lauma, this has actually been in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. I think the best way to approach this is to first have a look at Nahida. Hey, eyes on the screen. Look at her. You look at that sweet innocent girl and you tell her that you are going to abandon her like the schmuck sages of Sumeru did 500 years ago. You can't do it, can you? That is why you should probably get Nahida. Although if you could actually do it, then yeah, you definitely don't need to get Nahida. What you do need is some help. There is something up with you. Okay. The big reason why I recommend Nahida is that even now I still play with her a lot. I play with Nahida in a lot of different teams and all sorts of content, and I don't think I've ever been disappointed by her. Definitely helps that I have her C2 though, which I'll talk about later in the Constellations section, but suffice to say, Nahida's C2 is a very strong constellation. But as you may have heard, someone is about to show up who actually has a part of Nahida's C2 baked into her kit, and that has been a major fuel for the Nahida Doom post-industrial complex. I can't believe all you meta slaves have unironically turned into grand sages are. Guys, come on. We have to be better than this. Look, some of these points brought up by the naysayers are in fact correct, but I still cannot in good conscience pretend like it's all over for Nahida because I just don't think that's true at all. And in order to prosecute this refutation, I first want to remind everyone about all the Dendro reactions that are in the game. Aggravate, Spread, Bloom, Hyperbloom, Burgeon, and Burning. And from that, we have the Quicken, the Bloom, and the Burning archetypes. And regardless of whatever meta value these reactions may or may not have, they exist, and you may still be interested in using them. Here's the thing about Lauma's release. C0 Lauma is going to be a lot stronger than C0 Nahida in the Bloom archetype. Her ult is Balloon Jin, and her being the only Nod-Krai character in the team will also result in those Bloom crits like I mentioned a little bit earlier. So for the newer players who don't have Nahida yet, if you know for a fact the only teams you want to play with Dendro are in fact the Bloom teams, then for the time being, yes, prioritizing Lauma over Nahida does in fact make the most sense. But do keep in mind, they are both off-fielders, which means even in Bloom teams, they can in fact be played together. They are in fact not mutually exclusive. But Bloom is not the be-all end-all of Dendro. Let's have a look at the other ones we can play. Burning archetype doesn't want either. Generally speaking, it prefers Emily, I think, maybe. Maybe not the Kunichi teams anymore. I don't know. Look, I'm not going to get into that. Depending on the team, both Lauma and Nahida can function relatively alright. If anything, it's the forward vape teams that can get a little bit finicky between the two. The Hydra characters build is going to matter. If they are built with EM, that should favor having Lauma around. But if they're built without EM, for example, if it's a Nuvolette team or a Molani team and they're scaling off HP for the most part, that should actually favor having Nahida around. The rest of the team comp will also matter as well. Having a red shredder like Xilonen should heavily incentivize bringing Nahida. Otherwise, Lauma can in fact be quite a lot better. When we look at Quicken teams, here's what each character brings. Lauma provides 25% Dendro Red Shred and a bit of spread damage. Nahida, on the other hand, provides, depending on your build, roughly 200 and 250 elemental mastery for the on-field DPS, and a lot of spread damage. Now, Lauma's Res Shred does sound pretty good on paper, but in practice, it's actually not as overpowered as people make it out to be. The reason why is because Deepwood Memories continues to exist and is basically a staple in every Dendro team. Once enemy res drops down into the negatives, any additional resist shred is only half as effective. Most enemies tend to sit around 10ish to 20ish% base Dendro resistance, so once Deepwood's done with them, Lauma's quote-unquote 25% res shred is actually just 12.5% effective res shred. So in reality, we're actually comparing 12.5% res shred to about 200ish, 250ish EM. That EM buff is usually pretty sizable for your on-fielder's reaction damage, by the way, regardless of whether or not they're Electro or Dendro. So Lauma's Shred, by comparison, only making Dendro attacks hit a little harder, does kind of not feel like as strong as that 200 EM. That said, Lauma does have a unique advantage of just not having to run Deepwood at all, because her Res Shred is actually pretty similar to what Deepwood can provide. She can instead use something like, let's say, Silken Moon's Serenade, which is the new support artifact set. This, of course, is plus 60 EM for the entire party for the time being, so at a baseline, I don't really feel like this is as strong as Nahida's 200, 250 EM for the on-fielder. It's a little bit situational, even though right now it's not really that great. I suspect things might get much more competitive when there are teams where you can have two Nod-Krai characters. That buff suddenly becomes 180 EM for the entire team. That is actually pretty good, so we'll just have to see. That being said though, I don't think this necessarily makes Lauma better than Nahida in these kinds of spread teams, and this is why. It's because of their personal damage. Both characters have off-field skills without ICD, so their Dendro application is actually excellent. Nahida, on the one hand, scales off EM. EM boosts her skill talent scaling, EM gives her a damage percent buff up to 80% from her passive, EM even boosts the crit rate of her skill, meaning she can go just EM and crit and hit really hard. Whereas Lauma split scales. Her actual talent multipliers use attack instead of EM. The only EM multiplier on her skill is Lunar Bloom direct damage, which you're not doing in a spread team. EM grants her a damage percent buff, but only up to 32% from her passive. This was of course balanced around that Lunar Bloom direct damage that I mentioned just a little earlier. So I don't expect her to actually hit as hard from, let's say, stacking EM like Nahida does. And because of that split scaling, it's usually a lot harder to build Lauma to do a lot of spread damage. That's not what she's designed for. So to recap, Bloom archetype now belongs to Lauma, but you can still play Nahida with Lauma in these teams. The Burning archetype more or less belongs to Emily, and the Quicken archetype still belongs to Nahida. If we were to use Lauma as a pattern, then perhaps someday someone is going to swoop in as some kind of aggravate spread support, and they'll probably bring along some defense shred, so that can be really useful. Wait, hang on. We kind of already have that. Her name is Lisa. The reality is, Nahida was never bad in the Bloom archetypes, especially if you mix the Quicken and Bloom archetypes together and you get something like Quickbloom. Nahida is still pretty solid in that. The only Dendro archetype that I've never really found her all that useful in is just the Burning one. Specifically, Burning itself. Forward Vape is still pretty good for Nahida. There's also a couple of actual gameplay related differences between these two characters that I want to discuss. Lauma has an advantage against multi-wave content because her Dendro app field doesn't require refreshing after an enemy has died. Her off-field Dendro app doesn't require triggers, so that's also pretty good. Nahida, on the other hand, has the advantage of like a pseudo-infinite AoE range. So long as at least two of the enemies are close enough to each other, they will link up, and as long as this keeps going, then Nahida's skill technically has like almost infinite range. And, you know, once they're all linked up, Nahida's skill will in fact hit every one of those enemies, so long as they are more or less chain linked to the one that you trigger a reaction on. Lauma's AoE field is not terribly small, but it is still a field. It does follow you around though, so that's actually pretty good, so you're not circularly impacted at the very least. Nahida's tag lasts for 25 seconds. Lauma's field only lasts for 15 seconds. That being said though, neither character has downtime on their skill, so that's actually pretty good. If anything, the duration is really more of a problem for anyone who is playing with like an on-fielder that tends to take up a lot of field time, like Cyno. What seems to be happening to Nahida feels a lot like what's happening to Xilonen. Let me explain. You have a very good versatile character in the form of Nahida or Xilonen. They get gradually replaced piece by piece with other stronger but more niche characters. Escoffier, Chevy, Citlali, Emily even, Lauma. So there may come a point where you want to ask yourself whether you want to go for 3 characters just so that you don't need to get 1 character. But I suppose with the route that they've gone with Lauma, it's still going to end up being a mostly equal proposition since C2 Nahida is basically 3 Nahidas. So from a value perspective, it's kind of the same. All of this to say, should you get Nahida? I think so. That concludes the part of the video where I give my overall opinion on Nahida. The rest of the video is just an update on what's new for her gameplay-wise, build-wise, and all that jazz. So before we get into that, don't forget to like the video and feel free to subscribe. Despite all the pushback that I've been giving to Lauma in this video, I remain very excited for her release and of course Nod-Krai. So ringing that bell icon will get you notified of the latest videos and live streams on the channel. On top of that, there's been this new hype function that you can potentially do on the video like this, which will contribute to this video by massively helping it with the algorithm. So if you are a nice person, doing that will, of course, help the video spread to the masses. Okay, let's go through what I usually do in videos like this. What's new for Nahida, my favorite teams, how to build her, including some of the new ways to actually build her. Nahida's last rerun was actually in the second half of version 5.1 and not a whole lot has been introduced for her, but of note, Xilonen from the first half does remain to be the most solid aggravate buffer in the game. Malwika and PMC are the better pyro off-fielders for burn vape teams, although their pyro app is usually fast enough that you don't really need burning, at least for like a Morlani team. Probably still need burning for your Nouvellette team. Janssen being able to use Scroll can sometimes be a better buff in aggravate teams than Sara. It's kind of weird how that actually happens, but there we go. Inefa can also be a Quickbloom support. My most favorite Nahida team is International. Lisa, Xilonen, Nahida, Miko. 4 of my most favorite characters. We're doing tons of damage, it's quick swappy as hell, and I'm also running C2 Xilonen, which does make the team so much more fun. I have also been a huge fan of other Quicken comps with notable characters like Clorinde, Cyno. With Cyno and Clorinde, I tend to also play them with Nahida in like a Quickbloom team where she may or may not be getting replaced by Lauma. Sometimes this team involves Inefa, sometimes is Farina, and like I mentioned, Lauma, in which case Nahida is probably not going to be involved in this team because I'd rather bring Baiju for the Farina team at the very least. And finally, there's Nilou teams. Like I mentioned in my top 5 Lauma teams video, I very much want to get Lauma's Scene 1 just so I can use her as my dedicated Nilou team healer, with Nilou, Lauma, Nahida, and Candice, on-field Candice of course. Until then, I've been mostly switching between Baiju and Yao Yao. These are my favorite Dendro teams, but I can already hear some of you asking, hang on, what about Hyperbloom? No. I personally find pure Hyperbloom teams like Nahida, soon to be Lauma, Shinobu, Double Hydro to be the least interesting Dendro teams around. Nahida's build has remained pretty much the same for the most part. For weapons, Jug and Kagura's remains as her best in slot weapons. Jug for a more supportive Nahida, Kagura's for a Nahida who just wants to hit harder. I personally stick with Kagura's cause I ain't got no Jug. Citlali's signature is a new option. It's 265 EM plus 100 EM from the passive, so it's basically a 365 EM substat at R1. This is more EM than what the Jug can get Nahida, but the Jug also gives the team plus 40 EM. The 100 extra EM translates to plus 25 EM for the on-fielder, provided you haven't hit the cap under Nahida's ult, so yeah, it's not going to actually be better than the Jug. Sunny Morning Sleep It is another new weapon, but it has a dud passive for Nahida, so it's only a 265 EM stat stick. If you are a psychotic plunge Nahida player, first off, just understand you have been seen, you have been recognized, and frankly, you have my respect. Vivid Notions should actually be pretty damn strong for you. That being said though, Nahida's skill has a minimum of 5-second cooldown, so maybe every third plunge you can actually add a skill used to massively boost the crit damage of her next plunge. So I guess her plunge has another ICD on top of it? I don't know if Long Night's Oath would be the preferred artifact set for Plunge Nahida though, mainly because her charge tag is a bit iffy to use, especially in a plunge rotation like that, and you do end up using quite a lot of stamina. Would be interesting to see if anyone has managed to pull this off though. Widsith is also a really good DPS weapon for Nahida. All 3 buffs can be used by her. She definitely does prefer not landing on the attack buff though. At this point, I really wouldn't be recommending sack frags or even the 3-star magic guy anymore. The reason why is because if you want a readily accessible weapon with that stat line, the Nod-Krai craftable is going to be available. It's called Black Marrow Lantern, and it's probably okay for Nahida. But if you do decide to R5 it, it's probably because you're crazy like me and you want to play a triple Dendro Nilou team against something like Tulpa. Speaking of Nod-Krai, on-field Nahida players can use the new DPS artifact set by forming a team with 2 Nod-Krai characters. But with Lauma, a Nefer, and a Hydro, I don't think there'll be enough Hydro to get Lunar Charge happening, so it's a bit more of a cheerleading Nefer team at that point. With a Nefer, Cyno, and another Hydro perhaps, it may be harder to maintain a Quicken Aura for Nahida to do some more spread damage. This will require testing for me to figure out, maybe, if I get around to it. Otherwise, the support set should work fine on Nahida, especially in a Quickbloom Cyno team with a Nefer and Cyno. Cyno can also run the Deepwood set instead if necessary. The more traditional artifact sets are still my general recommendation. Deepwood remains the go-to, Golden Troop is a perfectly fine alternative. In fact, it's a phenomenal alternative if you know for a fact that someone else in your team already has Deepwood, and Gilded Dreams is actually okay. The artifact stats that you're looking for remain the same jumbled mess as they have always been. Your sands should still be EM, but your cup can be EM or Dendro damage. The hat can also be EM or crit. It really just depends on the team you're playing and what kind of Nahida you want to play. The more supportive you want, the more you'd lean towards EM. But at the end of the day, any combination of these pieces will result in Nahida doing relatively similar damage, but there is at least a way of making her do a bit more damage. There's also a question of ER. As much as I'd like to use Nahida's ult, I personally don't have this burning need to pop it all the damn time. I kind of just use it whenever it's available. You shouldn't need any more than 440 ER though, especially if you're on the desperate side. I have been hovering around 120 ER. Seems fine to me. And finally, with Nahida's Constellations, I suppose now that Lauma exists, you could argue that C2 is getting close to being necessary, but Nahida functions absolutely perfectly fine without them. But let's have a look at them anyway. C1 is actually a pretty good constellation for Nilou teams, but also for Burn Vape comps, especially ones with Nuvalet instead of Molani. Does go largely unnoticed in the Quicken comps. C2 is where Lauma gets that passive from in the first place. Now, like I mentioned, it's overall very strong, and if you can afford it someday, I highly recommend it. It should be getting updated to also give direct Lunar Bloom damage, i.e. from Lauma's hold skill, another 40 crit value. So that's of course really useful. For the Bloom buffs, just keep in mind the crit rate part of it actually stacks with Lauma's passive, not the crit damage though, that remains fixed at 100%. C3 is skill levels, C5 is ult levels, both of which are useful. And C4 is just more EM, which is kind of whatever at this point, especially against bosses. C6 on the other hand is the standard 5-star massive DPS constellation. If you want constellations, I would stop at C2 unless you really like Nahida. So that's Nahida. She's still really good in my experience, and I will keep playing with her no matter what the doomsayers have to say. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. How are you getting Nahida, and what's your favorite Nahida team? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.